This is the KJ Singh Show with your host, KJ Singh. Today, I'm going to talk about a variety of different topics, but the central theme of this episode will be how the establishment, how oppressors, how imperialist forces use fear to justify their atrocities. So, yesterday I talked about the massacre in Gaza City, otherwise known as the Flower Massacre, whereby starving Palestinians waiting for desperately needed flour from aid trucks were fired upon by Israel forces, whereby 104 were killed and hundreds more injured. Now, since this happened, Israel's has had a PR problem on their hands, as they usually do when they commit their atrocities. Naturally, they lie because, of course, they want the morale on their side. They want the benefit of the doubt from liberal centrists, from normies, essentially, who, despite everything, they must be living in a cave most of the time because, of course, there have been just too many, a mountain of lies to justify the atrocities that are happening right now. It's not a accident that the propaganda that is being pushed out by Israel is called Hasbara in Hebrew, which translates to explanation. An explanation for anything, the worst atrocities whatsoever. And the explanation that they gave regarding the atrocity was multifold, but it changed every time new evidence emerged. First explanation was you had huge numbers of men and trampling over each other in a stampede for food, right? Another explanation was that aid trucks ran them over, and however, evidence emerged that actually they were shot at. You could see quite clearly evidence of bullet wounds and videos of actual audio and video of shooting taking place. And so they couldn't go along with that explanation, those two explanations. So they went along with the third explanation, which was the soldiers felt unsafe in the presence of starving Palestinians. Of course, they were quite far away, so not exactly in amidst the immediate vicinity of the starving Palestinians, but they were felt unsafe. Perhaps they were giving them like this anti-Semitic glare, unsafe, anti-Zionist glare, and that prompted these really poor army soldiers to open fire, And so safety is a big theme, is one of the central themes in trying to justify the immense amount of carnage, savagery, the brutalization, and the dehumanization of the Palestinians. By talking about things in terms of safety in this circumstance, you do three main things. First of all, you center your narrative rather than the narrative of the so-called other, the Palestinians. This is the reason why they showed the Palestinians from bird's eye view as little ants, as if they are not humans like us. They are, these creatures in large hordes, large numbers. Number two, it gives an explanation, and it kind of gives cannon fodder for the liberals, for the centrists, and of course the right wingers who already don't care anyway. They don't really care about what's happening to Palestinians because they believe in a social Darwinistic view of society, of reality. And number three, it dehumanizes the Palestinians because it showcases them as these scary individuals that even whilst army soldiers are, it makes it a little bit comical when you have army soldiers who are, in their armored vehicles, kind of completely protected from head to toe, in the latest military gear. They, however, are somewhat scared by starving Palestinians who are without anything other than the shared desire for survival. They apparently were so scary. And this concept of fear, which I'm going to explain in the next 2 minutes, was used in the argument I watched very recently between Benny Morris, one of the foremost historians in Israel, and debate with Norman Finkelstein. And the argument that Benny Morris used for the annexation of territories from the West Bank was for security, for safety. But if you're scared, the last thing you want to do is annex more territory so that you're in the presence of even more people who want to get their vengeance, or so it's a straw man of an argument. When you're constantly alluding to security, you humanize yourself, you dehumanize the other. You're constantly, so you can play the role of the oppressor whilst having the benefit of the doubt of being a victim. You can play the victim whilst oppressing 2.3 million Palestinians. This is the insanity and of our situation, and the mainstream news and politicians swallow it hook, line, and sinker. They take it on and they believe it without any question. So that's where we are right now. Safety, the issue of safety, our security, is used as a premise to justify atrocity. And this is what is happening in the UK. The very same thing is happening in our UK politics right now. So, regards to the protests that are happening in voting, or rather, calling for a ceasefire, and for having some sort of recognition of the fact that there are humanitarian disasters happening on the ground, even whilst the establishment cannot bear to acknowledge the amount of suffering, the amount of just inequality, of the asymmetry of violence, as well as the shared dehumanization of the Palestinians just by virtue of simply being born there at the wrong place. There's collective punishment. Now, obviously, if you have an issue with the perpetrators of, October 7th, then you seek them out. You don't collectively punish the entire population, which is what is happening, which in turn increases resistance to the very entity that is committing the atrocities. This is basic common sense. And of course, perhaps the countries that is doing this, Israel is doing this, perhaps they know this. Perhaps the end goal is to eradicate the entire population. And so therefore there won't be an issue down the line. Of course, problem we have here is the context in which this is happening. You're surrounded by all these nations, and I don't condone their behaviors. I don't condone their ideology. I mean, I believe in peace and secularism and liberalism, democracy, but we're living in a real world, right? And so therefore you're going to have repercussions down the line. You're going to have, you already are showing yourself to be the evil entity amidst a sea of people just witnessing the sheer horrors you're perpetrating, you're inflicting on the Palestinian people. So what do you expect? Do you think this is going to be a good thing long term down the road? I think that this is not going to be a long-term productive activity in terms of not just the lies perpetrated in the media, the politicians supporting it. You're going to have like a huge contingent of people who are just disillusioned within the domestic affairs, and then you obviously have whole countries dedicated, who are looking at this, and they're seeing the sheer barbarity, the evil that's perpetrated on the Palestinian people. And yes, we've got people who are protesting, and this is used as an argument to foment and to just spread Islamophobic sentiments as a way to detract away from the genocide that's happening right now. This is a strategy used by the ruling class. The ruling class and its support of its allies overseas in the Middle East in the form of Israel. And therefore, shedding any responsibility for any consideration for humanitarian principles, any consideration for the fact that there's collective punishment happening, this, completely displacement of any consideration for human rights. And so the focus on Islamicist elements and Islamic fundamentalism, or Islam as religion, is a deflection from the shared horrors that perpetuated on the Palestinian people. Of course, many of these people were also Christians, and a lot of Christian activists have played a big part and play a big part in the liberation of the Palestinian people. So it's not necessarily Islamicist movement anyway. And for what it's worth, I mean, it's very obvious that within the hundreds of thousands of protesters, there's such a tiny percentage of people who are breaking the law, or even if that, because of course the net of xenophobia when it comes to the right wing, they will use xenophobic argument of xenophobia to justify cracking down on any kind of freedom of speech. So, for example, a woman was prosecuted for a South Asian woman, similar ethnicity or same ethnicity as Sunak and Priti Patel and Suella Braverman. She satirized them as coconuts, brown on the outside, white on the inside. There's nothing racist about it when you yourself are from the same background. And she was prosecuted for this. And this is the weaponization of racism by the right wing. They don't understand how racism works, how you can identify with systems of oppression, even whilst, seemingly, physically being of a different background, you can still support systems of oppression that really benefit a class of people. Not necessarily the white people generally, but the ruling class, of which include a large proportion of very rich white people who benefited from past slavery, benefited from past colonialism. This is what we call old money. The barons, the lords that benefited from sheer amount of suffering inflicted on the global south. So Sunak is using the establishment, and of course Labour, because of course we saw the whole shenanigans regarding the Speaker of the House, blaming an issue regarding the order of votes on SNP's opposition day. Basically, in simple, layman's terms, in TLDR terms, Labour hijacked the agenda when it was supposed to be SNP's day for setting out the agenda. And then Lindsay Hoyle, who's Speaker of the House, he said it was because of fear of how Labour might be perceived by the public, and how safety of the politicians, of Labour politicians. Of course, this is weaponization. This is complete detraction from the fact that Labour hijacked democracy, this parliamentary procedure, in order to insert their own motion, their own agenda, to protect Keir Starmer's kind of image, because of course there's an interview where he actually legitimized the withdrawal of food, water, electricity from Israel, from Palestine by Israel. He agreed with it, and in the motion that SNP put forward, they said that Israel was inflicting collective punishment, which of course would mean that Labour, if they were to vote in agreement of SNP's motion of a ceasefire and the provisions and the agreement set out in this motion, then Labour would be then therefore agreeing that Israel committing collective punishment, and which is completely kind of showcases that Keir Starmer was agreeing to collective punishment at one point. Of course, he's an opportunistic deadweight of a politician who's only benefiting and jumping on the bandwagon of Conservative downfall. Really, he's benefiting off the failure of the Conservatives. Now, so fear is being used to detract away from both Labour being opportunistic in the parliamentary procedure, but also fear is used also to detract away from the hundreds of thousands of protesters who are protesting the genocide that's happening in Gaza. Fear is also used against George Galloway and his political win in the Rochdale by-election. Now, George Galloway has an interesting past. He's got interesting takes. I don't agree with all of them, but I agree with his ones on Gaza situation, because of course he is one of those. He's a bit of a humanitarian, but he's also a bit of a. Some of his kind of beliefs can be a bit anti-woke in terms of let's say trans issues or women's rights issues. I don't necessarily agree with him on these issues. He's kind of a bit of a strong man in terms of he's a force of energy, and he's charismatic, and he speaks with such force and determination. And I don't doubt his sincerity, but I will agree with his takes in Palestine. And this is the reason why he won in a constituency that has a high Muslim proportion. They take up they're not the majority. They're about 30%, but that is still high enough for them to win by 10,000 or so votes, which left Labour, Conservative trailing far behind. Labour weren't even number two, but it's just part of the it's a consequence of the fact that Labour are failing on the issue of the Gaza situation. They tried to compensate so heavily to try and shift their allegiances, let's say, to the state of Israel, and to not be in a position of vulnerability to the right-wing media, as was the case with Corbyn, and so therefore they shifted their attention to a very hard right Zionist policy, which is biting them kicking them in the arse right now in certain segments of society. I still think Labour will win, but Labour are failing in certain areas. I also think Labour may go, may win by a much smaller margin than previously, prior to the Gaza genocide, because more and more people are becoming aware of the fact that he is a bit of a opportunistic on this situation. He's a bit of a genocide kind of apologist, and so it's going to be tough in certain areas. It's also going to be tough for millennials and Gen Zs, who obviously more strongly for a ceasefire and are anti-genocide, as one should be, but don't expect the centrist elites and the right-wingers to have any moral clarity, as if Holocaust was bad because it was bad for Jews, not because it was bad for human beings who happen to have slight different, have different ethnicities. Just otherization, but in and of itself, is the main issue, not the fact that only a specific group was targeted. Never again was wrong not because one group was on the wrong side of the concentration camp. It's about it's about the concentration camp itself being wrong. So That's the main issue there. And so Rishi Sunak is using this too also as a way to George Galloway's win as a way to kind of like spread fear and a moral panic regarding his win, even though he is a reflection of democracy. He won because the people voted for him. You know, people asking George Galloway is, you know, I saw an interview recently, well today, regarding whether whether some people will be disappointed in his win. George Galloway said, like, give the voters a chance. They voted for me. I mean, imagine that kind of framing you wouldn't expect of Labour or a Conservative politician. And it's almost as if George Galloway is like that nail that's stuck out and, you know, has to be nailed in, because of course both Labour and Conservative, they're both, you know, two cheeks of the same arse. They both are, you know, contribute to this whole this system that we have right now, which is a duopoly but one party state, essentially, especially on this subject of genocide that's happening right now. They're pro genocide, and they're pro taking away workers' rights. They're pro establishment. They're pro big business, pro corporation. They're not going to change anything meaningful. They're not aware of climate change on a meaningful level too. But this is, you know, I'll be talking about this in the future more, how fear is used to justify the worst atrocities, to create a sense of humanization of oneself or a group of people, of the especially the perpetrators, and the dehumanization of those who are at the receiving end. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. That'd be very much appreciated. Enjoy.